Welcome to the String Theory of the Unexplained. I'm your host, John Ventry. Your co-host is Fred Saluga. And today, we're going to discuss Lilith, the legend, the myth of Lilith. So, Fred, you know, we did that episode on Penny Dreadful,
right,
maybe 2 years ago. And the one guest, she seemed to know a lot about Lilith, because it's mentioned, and it's mentioned in a lot of the horror movies, werewolf, vampire movies, that type of stuff. So it got me thinking, because I always heard of Lilith, but I never read anything on it. So what I did was I went out and I looked for books, which is like do my research, right? So I'm looking for anything on Lilith. There is almost nothing on Lilith out there. The only thing you find is, this is a poem that was written. I mean, it's not a lot of pages here, 30 pages, whatever, even less. Lilith, the legend of the first woman. That's it. That's all you find out there, other than a paragraph here or there. And matter of fact, when I was looking, this book was mentioned by Sabine Baring-Gould, who's the same author of The Werewolves that we did the other episode on. And they say this is the book, Legends of the Patriarchs and Prophets, right? But you go to it, he's got like 2-3 lines on Lilith. That's all that's there. So I'm saying there's nothing out there on this legend of Lilith. So I've always been pretty creative. So I gave it some thought, you know, the Garden of Eden, all of this, and how it could transpire and all of that. So I wrote my own short story. I sent it to Fate magazine. I sent it to Steve Mirror with Phenomenon magazine, and we'll see if they publish it or not. You know. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to read my story of Lilith, which is the only one that's really out there as far as this goes. Now, this is based on Hebrew folklore. There's nothing in the Torah or the Old Testament that mentions Lilith. But afterwards it became folklore in the Jewish community and also in the Arab community, because obviously Israel and the Arabs, they're all in the same location.
But isn't it the fact that when Cain killed Abel, he went to the village of Canaan? Didn't she run Canaan?
Canaan?
Yeah.
I don't know. You know, I don't know about that. Is that where the name Canaan comes from? Yeah, I think you're right, because Canaan was populated by giants.
Right. And
right? The offspring.
She was actually Adam's first wife.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you know more about it, I didn't come across that with Canaan, but it does make sense. So there's very little here. There's no mention in Genesis or anything like that. So what you're going to hear now, I'm going to read it to you, is my story, and this slides and everything for you, is my interpretation of this vague story of the mother of the first Nephilim, right? Because this would be the children born of offspring with demons and Lilith. So they are actually the first Nephilim, and she is referred to as the stealer of children's breath. Think about that, you know? So in Nordic mythology, in the Scandinavian countries, they have a creature that's similar to Lilith, and it's called Gryla, G-R-Y-L-A, Gryla. And she goes, and here's a picture of her, and she would kill children, eat children, you know, drink their blood. So that's about the closest I could find of any other legends. But so here's my short story. That's not going. I don't think it's going to be that long. Adam turned, and there stood his fiery, red-headed wife Lilith. Now I put a lot of symbolism in this. If you listen to it, right? She stood 6'1" with a very toned body, and wanted the last word, and insisted there was more to see beyond Eden. She could see the shore of a sea when she climbed high up in a tree, and she saw movement out there of a tall, thin figure walking alone. Adam tried to counsel his wife that it was his job to protect and provide for her, and since he is considerably larger than she is, he's the master of the relationship. That's kind of how it was back then, you know. So
that's how it is nowadays with a lot of people.
Some people, yeah. Everything, and he says to her, everything and everyone has its place in Eden.
Yeah.
Right? You have a purpose and you have your place. Lilith replies, well, what if the flower rejects the bee? That's symbolism, right? Lilith's face showed her displeasure, and she turned and said she would be on top tonight if Adam ever expected to consummate the relationship, right? She was taking the top. So all 6'8", 370 pounds of genetically perfect blonde-haired Adam turned and tensely headed into the field to run with the lions and wrestle with the silverback gorillas, who he easily tossed around. You see, Fred, there's more to this, in my mind, in that if you think about, if the story's true, the first humans, Adam and Eve and Lilith, let's say, are genetically perfect.
Yeah.
They're genetic, because I think they had IQs of 300.
Right.
They were actually connected to God with telepathy. Right. They didn't have any diseases, no genetic defects. Right. I picture Brock Lesnar, like from my UFC poster there, as Adam, big, powerful guy, 6'7", 6'8", and over 300 pounds. But then when you think about these old Bible stories, though, they lived 1,000 years, 900, 800, 600, 5, until it leveled out at 120, right? Yeah. So I put a lot of symbolism, but also facts behind how I think it could have been back then. So Lilith replies, what if a flower rejects the bee? Lilith's face sure, I already read that part, that then he turned and he went to play with the other animals from back then. And back then, animals were able to speak. Right. That's what was said, right? So frustrated, Lilith headed to the edge of Eden and encountered God. She told God that she was free and independent and that God made her perfect and the equal, if not superior, to Adam. God responded that woman was made for man, man was not made for woman. She must go to Adam and consummate their relationship and be fruitful and multiply. Lilith sneers and heads to the grassy edge of Eden. God responds that if you leave Eden, you will be barred from ever returning, shall suffer much misfortune. Lilith bolted beyond the edge of Eden into the unknown land. She stopped to look back at the only home she ever knew, to see a Seraphim angel with a fiery sword guarding the entrance. She knew she could never return. She ran to the shore of the sea and followed its path. Lilith encountered the tall, thin man who was more handsome than Adam. He said he would give her all the wonders of the world, but she must come with him to the land of Nod and populate it for him. They walked up a path where she saw caves and his flock. The man walked with a limp from the great fall. That's actually in these prophecies, that he injured his ankle when he fell from heaven. And Satan walks with a limp. Right? The man, Satan, introduced Lilith to his disciples. She stepped back and asked, why do they look so different than us? As if they were struck by lightning. Some had scaly skin, small tails, and horns. Satan responded that his flock were once great warriors and more diverse than mere humans, and that Cumiel was the only fallen angel ever destroyed by God in his anger. And that's what I read. That's the only one ever killed. And he said, like Lilith, God banishes but doesn't destroy what he creates. Lilith saw a female, Semjace, who looked human except for pointy ears. Satan took Lilith to a cave that winded down and showed her symbols and writing. He said he would teach her his language, which was magical. She asked what those rock carvings were of large-headed people looking up at a flying disc. He said he was planting that there now for when in the future humans will believe there is a superior race from the stars, but it's actually his flock here on earth tricking them. He motioned, that's my UFO planted evidence, right? Mm-hmm. He motioned for Lilith to follow him down. If you think about that, Fred, if those rock carvings and cave paintings were planted by Satan, think about that. And everybody's believing, oh, there's people from the star, and it's a trick. Well, it's a trick, is what it is. It's fallen angels. It has nothing to do with the stars, And somebody like Satan, who's the second most powerful, behind God, right, would be smart enough to think of that in the future when we are able to actually invent stuff, So I thought that was pretty interesting. He motioned for Lilith to follow him down the winding path deeper into the cave, but she froze in fear and dread as if something unsafe was down below. she backed away and said she would speak with the others. When none were looking, she fled back to Eden, her first home. Lilith got as close to the entrance of Eden as possible as the 10-foot-tall Seraphim stood guard. She could see another with Adam, a female similar to her, but slightly shorter with brown chestnut hair. Adam and his mate were playing with their favorite lion. The Seraphim told Lilith that Adam has a new respectful wife named Eve, and that God will be angry if Lilith doesn't leave. Lilith turned in extreme jealousy and ran back to the land of Nod to be the mother of their flock. Lilith told Satan that she would only mate with his flock if he destroyed Eden, and Satan agreed. That night, Lilith mated with Moloch, then Azazel, and then Pharazumph, and there is reasons I picked those names when you look them up. When she awoke in the morning, she found Gap, G-A-A-P, because he had bat wings, and he was laying next to her, and his thin, long teeth were biting her neck and drinking some blood. Lilith hesitated a few seconds because it felt good before throwing Gap off of her. She felt different as her hearing and sight were keener. She rose and looked out of the cave towards Eden and saw like a spreading wind, everything was changing color. Everything went from very bright colors to more dull and dark colors because everything had changed at that point. So Satan had sent Gryla and Abaddon to Eden at daybreak. Abaddon distracted the Seraphim while Gryla slipped into Eden disguised as a serpent. Gryla convinced Eve that God didn't really say what he said about the beautiful fruit on the tree of life. She needed to eat from the tree in order to give life to Adam's children. So he's tricking her at this point. And you got to realize, what does Eve know? You know, no experience, right? Only knows whatever was implanted in her, or maybe this time it's whatever Adam tells her. So she was completely naive. So when Eve reached for the fruit to take it from the tree, Gryla said, "Let me get it for you, since the swaying leaves are sharp like razors, and they'll cut your hand." Think about that, a tree with leaves that are like razor blades. So if you reach to grab the forbidden fruit, you could cut your hand off, right? Gryla handed Eve the fruit, and she bit it. Gryla slithered away, so he tricked her, so now she bit the fruit. Eve presented the fruit to Adam, who didn't want Eve to be mad at him like Lilith was, so he took a bite also, right? Very realistic, right? He didn't want to annoy her, and she would run away and leave. The couple walked away hand in hand toward their favorite lion. God approached them and asked what they had done. Adam confessed. God told Adam to send Eve to the land of Nod or suffer the consequence. Eve wept, she was hysterical, crying. Adam told God that it was his responsibility to protect his wife and would not banish her. Right? That's what a man does in his relationship. Then God proclaimed his punishment on them and on the world. So the brightness of everything dulled, and Eve looked into the eyes of her pet lion, and they changed. The love was gone, the animal's lips rose, its eyes focused on Eve, its hair stood up, and it methodically started moving towards her. Eve screamed to Adam for help. God slayed the lion, and they wore its fur for clothing, but they were told never to eat meat or drink blood. And I think that's the version that actually happened, because people say it was a lamb that was slayed for their clothes.
Right.
I think it was the lion who was their favorite pet, let's say, and that's the fur that they got to cover them. And I think that's pretty creative to use the lion instead, right? So now, months later, Moloch, and you know who Moloch is? He's the god that you sacrifice children to, the demon that you sacrifice. That's why I used that name there. And back then, actually, when you go back about 3,000 years, 4,000 years, they were doing sacrifices of children to Moloch, M-O-L-E-C-H. So Moloch tells, there's a reason I picked all these names. I didn't just like pick them out of a hat. Moloch tells Lilith that her baby is not right and must be aborted and sacrificed to Satan. Lilith complies, and she drinks the blood of the infant and the two burn it in a ritual. Lilith is taught spells and magic. She becomes the mother of the Turok-han, or the vampire children. And that's actually the name that's used, the Turok-han. Most of her children look human, just like she used to, but some are like Satan's flock. So just like, you know, any people that mate, one could look like the father, could look like the mother, like the grandparents, etc. So some look like Satan's demons. The Red Sea is the home of the demons, which is true. That's where all of this stuff took place, in Syria and all those places around the Red Sea. So Lilith, Eve, and Semjace and their children bear many children, since they lived 900 years, 800 years, 700 years. And if you're able to have children that whole time, let's say, how many kids, for 800 years you're having kids? Because you got to explain where all these people came from. And if the 3-4 generations, where did all these people come from? So that's my version, is that they were able to have kids for 900 years. And after that, each generation would live less of a lifespan until it came down to 120. And that's exactly what they say, right? And it came down to 120 years. Now also, Eve's children were always twins, male and female. So now every birth had at least 2, right? So that adds more children. Only the children of Eve have souls and can enter heaven in the afterlife. So the children of Lilith and Semjace have no souls. And, you know, I'll be honest with you, Fred, when you look at the world and the things that happen and the brutality and the killings, do those people have souls? I've always said that. Are there soulless humans from animals out there that don't have the blood of let's say, through Adam and Jesus and all of that?
Well, they're saying now that a lot of your graves are abducting people to take their souls.
Well, I agree with that, because this thing, from what I've seen, like Whitley Strieber said that, you know, I had something here in the house, and I think it was here for my soul. I actually believe that, you know.
Dave Pilatus said it too,
no? Yeah, and you know, it's funny, a lot of the things that I said 5-6 years ago about the demonic side of alien abduction and all of that, all of a sudden a lot of people saying that, you know. It's like Dogman, right? Somebody says Dogman, and all of a sudden everybody's doing it, right? So, that's our prior episode. So, Satan tells Lilith that she must cause the first son of Adam to kill his brother. Lilith responds that she'd rather kill Eve and end their kind. It's a pretty good idea, right? Satan says that is forbidden, but they need Cain to join them and reproduce with their children for greater diversity in numbers. So Lilith casts her spells and she complies. Lilith tells Satan she enjoyed watching Cain kill Abel, but prefers killing human infants by stealing their breath and drinking their blood. Satan smiles and says our greatest strength will be their disbelief of our existence. And you see that a lot today too. It's like you mention the devil and demons and they laugh at you like it's not real. It is the most real thing, right? So my question is, to end this, who lost more? Adam or Lilith, right? Paradise lost. Who lost more paradise, Adam or Lilith? I say that Lilith lost more than Adam did. That's my version of paradise lost.
But if you look at it now, okay, the Mormons.
Yeah.
Okay, they used to say that Cain killed. Okay, Cain actually became Bigfoot, and he was to walk on Earth for the rest of the time as a Bigfoot, but nobody would like him and this and that. Now they changed that in their religion.
Yeah.
But at one time that was there, so you know that could be part of
the
this
thing. Well, you
too.
had said that to me a few years ago, and I said, really? And I get to that. You know.
Okay.
So now what I did to add to this, because it's not a lot, it's only my version of the Lilith story, and there is nothing out there. And I hope they publish this. I think Phenomenon magazine will publish it. I'm not so sure Faith magazine will publish it, because there's a lot of symbolism there with abortion and women's lib and all that. And they may not like that, but you know what? I think I wove it all into a really good story.
Right.
And I don't know where else I could send this to publish it. But so then I took a look at this book, Legends of the Patriarchs and Prophets. And it's based on, you know, he says in the beginning that there's been a lot of exaggeration in a lot of these stories. And I agree with that as we go through some of them. But it's based on 4 worldviews are in here. And it got a little confusing because he would tell you the Arabian story, then the Jewish story, then the Muslim story, then the Chinese story, you know, and then some other, you know, countries, what was said there, and it would start to get really confusing because they had different stories for the same people, you know. So this book was written in 1884. So let's take a look at some of the things that he said in there. And again, this is considered one of the authorities, let's say, on some ancient prophecies, you know. So the Lilith story, like I said, is it's not in the Old Testament. It's not, you don't find that anywhere. So I wrote my own. So in this book it says, Satan fell after the fall of Adam and Eve, not before. I don't agree with that, but that's one of the possibilities from one of those other cultures. Others say Satan fell because he refused to bow to Adam. That's the version I believe. God created Adam, and it was so low compared to him because he was the top, the 9 levels of angels. He was the top level. So you go through the other 8 levels, and then you get to humans. So he refused to bow to Adam, and that's why he was banished. Also said in there that Satan rules Mars. And you know, when you go back then, you know, people thought that they were living societies on Mars and Venus, your friend, right? Venus rising. Said that Satan took 4 wives, including Lilith. So that's in this book, right? And they each bred, the 4 of them bred 478 legions. So I looked up a legion, which is 6,000. So 478 times 6,000 people equals 2.68 million devils and jinn. That's how many are on Earth, invisible. Is out of 8 billion people, you've got 2.68 million of these entities who shape-shift into other things. Satan limps from breaking his leg in the fall. Animals spoke prior to Adam's fall. Adam was created male on one side, female on the other, and then later God split him into 2 people. That's an interesting thought. I never thought of something like that. And it says here that celibacy is unnatural. I'd have to agree with that. The Jews from the Hebrew mythology got into the Arab society, let's say, because that's where they were, right? The pharaohs in Rome and all. A lot of their mythology got into into the Arab society. They believe that Eve was the second wife. So it comes right from the Middle East. This is where this comes from, not anywhere else in the world. Lilith and Eve were genetically far superior to today's females. An hour in Eden equals 80 years. So a day in Eden, so the first day, because all of this happened on day 6 is what they say, right? That all happened, one day equaled 920 years, because each hour is a year, is 80 years. Satan said 3 words. 3 words would save someone from sickness, aging, and death. And he don't tell you what the words are. I know what they are. Because I read this 20 years ago when I was writing my first novel on end-time prophecy. Thomas, doubting Thomas, when Jesus came back afterwards and wouldn't believe it was really him. Remember when he said, "Put your hand in my wound"? And then he whispered to Thomas, these 3 words, I think he said would save humanity, or everything is based on these 3 words. And the 3 words were calico, saloso, zizar. Now I have asked priests and pastors, like anytime I ran into one, I'd say this is in the it's in the Gospel of Thomas. That's why I'm adding this part to it. It's not in his book. It's in the Gospel of Thomas, right? And they was, well, that's not one of the 4 that were canonized to be in the Bible. But I said, still, it was written, right? Back then. What do those 3 words mean? It doesn't relate to any language on earth. You know, it's not Aramaic, it's not any of these, you know, it's not from Samaria or any of those. Nobody knows what the 3 words actually mean. But those are the 3 words that he's referring to. Calico, saloso, zizar. And if you know the meanings, let's say, of that, you'll live like they did for 1,000 years, so live forever. I don't know if I want to live forever, to be honest with you. Imagine being here forever.
Oh my God.
So in the Muslim faith, Adam and Eve later went to India, and that's where they died and they're buried in is India. And that demons cannot approach someone who's praying. Now think about movies, right? Well, what do you do if your house is got an entity, you pray, right?
Right.
So while you're praying, none of these creatures can approach you while you're praying, you know? It's funny, Rhonda told me when there was something in the house, she said, put the religious channels on your TV, leave it on all night, and sleep. Do not turn the TV off, because what are they doing the whole time? They're talking about God, they're talking about Gospels, and she said that's the way, because you're gonna have to fall asleep at some point. So that's what you do, and that was good advice that I got from her, along with a lot of other things that she told me. The Chinese believe that man is part spirit and part animal, and that Adam wore a ring that warded off demons. He was given a ring that would keep them away after the fall. That was one of the things that God gave him. Eve always bore twins and had as many as 12 children at once. Think about that. When you talk about how to populate the world, you have 12 kids, right?
There you go.
And they were always twins.
Yeah.
There was always a boy and a girl
Yeah.
that were twins, right? And
Well,
back then, you would marry your sister.
Wait a minute, they had twins and one boy and a girl, then how did Cain and Abel? They were allegedly twins.
Well, I'm going to get to that. No, Cain and Abel were not twins. Cain was
Huh?
older. Cain was older than Abel.
Oh.
Abel was the younger brother, and they
Oh.
were not twins. So now, what happens is you always married the twin that came out with you, because you had a lot in common, right? So you
Yeah.
would marry your twin. What Adam did, in looking at his two sons, Cain and Abel, he goes, "No, I'm going to switch it up. I'm giving Cain's twin to Abel and Abel's twin to Cain." Well, Cain didn't like Abel's twin. She wasn't as attractive or whatever. So that's the reason that he got annoyed, and in the field he killed Abel. He hit him with a rock and crushed his skull.
Yeah.
And then, and this actually takes place in Damascus, Syria. That's where they are at that point, is in Damascus, Syria. So both Cain and his twin sister now fled to the land of Nod. So, you know, people say, where did Cain get a wife, right? Because it's Cain and Abel. Well, they were born twins, and he took his, but again, the land of Nod, where did it come from? You're only in the second generation. Where is this land with all these other people?
Well,
And where'd they come from?
This is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Man. That's where Lilith or whatever her name is.
Lilith, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know. So, and here's another quote that I put in that he had said. Adam says, every city, once Cain killed Abel, Adam says to Eve, every city, how many cities are there, right? He says, every city is the same with vile men. We're in the third generation here. Where did cities of vile men come from? So, but again, the author says a lot of these old stories are exaggerated, but these are just one-liners that struck me, right?
But see, we don't know, again, timeline.
Well, that's what I said.
You know, this is the whole thing with the whole, you know, like he went to the village of Canaan. I mean, that could have been 1,000 years later.
Well,
We're not aware of that.
There's
you
a
know?
theory of that each day was 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And in this it said that each day was really 1,920 years, because time moved differently. I don't know. So all of Cain's children are really evil, right?
Mm.
So, and that's why I say, are they soulless humans? Because this is where the evil comes. So you've got Adam and Eve producing children with souls and morality. And you've got Cain and his sister and others producing these others that are like barbarians, you know? It kind of really explains the world we live in. You know, I tell you, when you leave the United States and people complain about us, you go to Iran, you go to North Korea, you go to China and do these things. Well, the basketball player, right? She goes into Russia with, what she had, marijuana with? She had pot. She got 9 years in prison. They don't put up with that stuff. And believe me, there was a lot more that they've done to people in those communist countries. This is one of the most tolerant and lenient countries on earth, along with Europe. Why? Because we all came from Western civilization based on European law and the Bible's 10 Commandments. And people miss that so much. It's based on the 10 Commandments and then really British law, European law, and customs, which is why I think Western civilization is the best, right? So then the storyline goes, like you had said, Cain becomes covered in hair and he grows a horn. So is that the start of Bigfoot? You had said
Right,
that
right.
Cain was the first Bigfoot as his curse for killing his brother. Cain and Adam die simultaneously in the year 930. When Adam dies, Cain dies also, but the way Cain died, I'll tell you in a second. Eve died the following year, so she lived 931 years. Adam lived 930. Now, Noah took Adam's body on the ark. It was interesting to read it, because you wonder, what did they, I mean, you think about it, Adam was the first human. They brought the body with them, it was probably wrapped, and they brought it onto the ark. They were not leaving it in a flood, right? So Adam, he says Adam is buried in Jerusalem, not India, right? So this, based on which culture I'm reading, that's what got confusing. They're giving you 4 or 5 different versions of the same story. So Seth is the third born son of Adam, right? So you got Cain, Abel, and then Seth is the third born. And he was involved in a perpetual war against giants, the sons of Cain. Now think about that. There's always been stories of giants. You mentioned Canaan, right?
Yeah,
Canaan was one of the cities full of giants, right? Jericho was another one full of giants. They were the offspring of Cain. Egypt took the name of Seth. Seth is their main god. And it was the third son, right? So Egypt takes Seth and makes him a god. Now in the book of Enoch, which is mentioned in here, it talks about the fall of the angels, the mating of the fallen angels with women and the giants and the flood. And then it talks about different planets and seasons and their visions of end time, the revelation and sin, in case anybody wants to read that book. So. Giants came from Cain's daughters and these fallen angels. It says in there that the jinn built the pyramids. They were the ones who moved all of the stone and cut it and put it all in place, because who knows how powerful they are. They could probably build the pyramids in a couple of weeks or a day, who knows, right? It says that Earth has been populated 7 times, and we're in the last and 7th cycle of populating before it's going to come to an end. That there's been 6 other cultures here over the years who tried, and over time they've been destroyed.
Well, I agree with that, because like I said, how many times was the earth destroyed? I mean, we don't know that. And I mean, you can go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years and have buildings. Who built them?
Well, they would, I know there's been 5 great ice ages, but that only affects the northern area. It doesn't affect the equator.
Yeah.
And there was a show on History Channel years ago that if all the humans were to die, and it talked about how long would it take for weeds, and if you don't do maintenance and you start getting leaks, how long would it take for all of these structures to collapse and be buried under? It was really only about 300 or 400 years, and every building, everything would be gone. You know, the only thing, one of the few things, the only thing that would be left? Mount Rushmore. Because they carved it into granite, into the stone.
Okay.
Anything that was stone carved like that will be here for a very long time. But anything man built, cars, houses, all of that stuff, give it 300 or 400 years, it's all gone. It all falls apart, So here's what happened to Cain, why he died the same time as Adam. His grandson, Tubal-Cain, killed Cain with an arrow. He saw him in the distance and thought he was some creature or beast because he was covered in fur, and he saw the horn. He thought it was an animal or something. He took his arrow and he shot and killed his grandfather. He killed Cain, and that happened at the exact same time that Adam died of old age. So then he says that upon exiting the ark, Noah was bitten by one of the lions, right? Because Noah was going to be like the head priest of society, of humanity. But God made his son Shem a priest because Noah's blood was impure. Remember when we did that episode with Rhonda, and we talked about giants and aliens and vampires and all of that stuff? One of the things in it was never to eat human flesh, never to drink blood, and quotes from the Bible. Well, Noah got bit by a lion, so now he no longer had pure blood in him. He couldn't be the head priest of humanity. So they picked his son. So this has come up also. His other son, so you have Shem, then you have Ham, which is Noah's third son. I'm reading this and it says that he had a book of magic, that he either invented magic, he's accredited with inventing magic. Most likely it was Satan gave him the book of magic.
Right,
I don't
right.
think he invented it himself, right? So this was like, you know, another no-no. So Ham is turned black and he's sent to Africa. So he's sent out of the Middle East and he's sent into sub-Saharan Africa, and it's the origin of voodoo and some of their rituals and ceremonies, and the African race comes from Ham. And I've seen that before written, but it comes from these.
Well, was there other people there?
I don't know. Well, he
You
obviously
said
needed a wife.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
I don't know. It didn't go into that. So, you know what, there probably was, because I'm going to get to something else that implies that there were other people there, right? So, now we talked about the Tower of Babylon.
Mhm.
So, after the flood, men followed Ham's grandson, Nimrod. And that's a name I know from history,
Yeah.
Nimrod.
yeah.
And they didn't follow Shem, who was the priest. So they rejected the priestly ways and God's ways, and they stuck with really Cain's offspring, you know, their evil ways. Ham stole Adam's garment that he was wrapped in, or that he originally wore, and he wore it. And as he wore that, almost like the spear of destiny, as he wore this, he was invincible. So Ham was able, so he was able to defeat the Babylonians and rule it, and he then turns the garment over to his son by the name of Cush, and they defeat the Babylonians and they rule it. Nimrod builds the Tower of Babylon, but his reason was that no flood ever again will drown us. That was the reason. They wanted to build the towers to get high enough. You'd think I would just go up on a mountain and start building,
Right.
rather than start on the ground level, right? But the reason was to avoid another flood. But their intention was they wanted to reach heaven and destroy it. So they hated God, and this is Cain's offspring. They wanted to build a tower probably into the clouds, and they wanted to be able to destroy heaven. Now, 600,000 men built the tower 70 miles high. Where do you get 600,000 men from? You're 5-6 generations into this. 600,000 men. But there are other stories, and we'll get to those. God is protected by 70 angels. So he sent them down to earth and created 70 languages, and he dispersed the Babylonians all around the world. He sent them with different languages. And then he caused an earthquake, and it took out the foundation of the tower, and the tower collapsed. The pharaohs intended to slay every son of Adam, right? Not the sons of Cain, but the sons of Adam. And for 3 years he killed all of the Hebrews, right? That's the Moses story.
Right.
Moses was taken and floated downriver and was taken in by Pharaoh, like you saw in the Ten Commandments, right? Now Joshua, when Moses dies, Joshua becomes their leader, right? So he led the Hebrews out of the desert, and God told him to attack the 3 cities of giants. Right, so all these stories about giants, it's right there, right? So there were 3 cities of giants, right? So Canaan was one, Jericho, I'm not sure what the other one was, but so Joshua goes to Canaan, right, and he tells them, you got 3 choices. You either flee, you align with me, or we go to war. And it says some of the giants fled to Africa. Some aligned with him, but most chose to fight him, right? That's when he collapses the walls of Jericho. And remember the Sword of Destiny, he had the Sword of Destiny with him. Because that history goes all the way back here also. So he attacks and he kills, the giants in Jericho, right? Now, the ones that had a treaty with him, they turned on him also. So what he ended up doing with them when they surrendered, let's say, was he cut their thumbs off. So they would never really be able to grip anymore. They'd have trouble holding things. He cut all their thumbs off. And Goliath, with David and Goliath, Goliath was a giant. So it says in here that David was born without a soul. So he didn't get his soul until he was 14 years old. That's an interesting, I don't know why they came up with that, but and Adam gave David 70 of his years. because Adam was supposed to live 1,000 years and he only lived 930. He asked God to give David 70 of his years so David could live longer. David, now get this, David was able to strike people with leprosy. He could cause you to get leprosy. And David slew Goliath with a slingshot, but he was a little guy. He was probably 4 feet tall.
Yeah.
Then it says after he killed Goliath, they had a special oil that they poured on him, and he grew to like 6 feet tall. You know, whatever.
Yeah.
So I mean, strange stories in this thing, you
A
know.
little bit bigger, I mean,
Yeah. Well, who wants to be 4
feet?
feet? Who wants to be 4 feet tall, right?
Yeah,
Unless you're
yeah.
gonna be a jockey. But so then again here, angels gave Solomon. Remember they said they gave Adam 4 jewels for a ring. Now it says these angels gave Solomon the 4 jewels that controlled the jinn. And what he did, he mounted it on a ring, and he commanded the jinn to build him a tower. King Solomon's temple, not tower, a temple, to build a temple. And that makes more sense to me that these big structures were built by fallen angels, so a way to control them, control angels or fallen angels, get them to do the heavy lifting and build this stuff, right? So now, Solomon encounters a valley of talking apes. Well, animals used to be able to talk prior to Adam, but talking apes that dressed like men and they were able to speak, right? So Solomon apparently got along with them. He signs a peace treaty with them and said, we will never attack you. And actually they came under attack and they had the treaty and showed it, and they said, oh, Solomon, that's from Solomon. And the army backed away, wherever they were from, Persia, whatever they were from, right? So, now God sent a pestilence that killed 1 million in Jerusalem. Where do you get 1 million people from? Again, I mean, I don't know, these stories, when you start to look into it, it couldn't be 1 million people. Not in Jerusalem at that time, because I remember Rome had 1 million residents in Rome, right? But that's, you're talking 1,000 years after this, 1,500 years after this. It was the biggest city in the ancient world with 1 million citizens, right? So, but this is saying he killed 1 million in Jerusalem. So how many were there? 3 million? 4 million? I don't know. Right? So what they did was, a wall was built around the corpses because they couldn't bury them all. It was 1 million dead people. They couldn't bury them. They walled them in. Years later, Ezekiel asked God to restore the corpses, and he did. He restored them, and they came back to life. But the descendants all had that odor of death to them. So, I mean, just another interesting story. I don't know. So that's these legends of the patriarchs and prophets, and I think, like the author said when he researched it, that there was a lot of exaggeration to these stories. But more importantly is my story of Lilith.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
I think I wrote a hell of a story there that covers the mythology.
Right.
And she's always credited with being the mother of demons, the mother of vampires, right? In a lot of these movies, you hear Lilith.
Yeah.
Well, there's no real story of her. I think I just wrote the first story, the true best story of Lilith, and the origin of
Nobody's
evil.
ever heard of her. I mean, you ask somebody.
You hear the name, but nobody can tell you anything about her, You just hear the name, So, anything else, Fred?
No, I'm cool.
Okay, so that's our episode. I don't know what we're up to. 102 is what I got here as far as our free YouTube episodes. This might be 104 because we just did another episode. But whatever there is, they're all free and they're for you to enjoy. So enjoy. Thank you.